But now you see it everywhere, as I predicted you would in 2020, and this goes far back ahead of 2020. It's something I've been studying since I was in college and studied some of this astrophysics under one of the greats, Anthony Avini at Colgate University, all right? So what we see it now is in the relationship between politics and money. You've hit the tipping point. I mean, I think this whole Doge/Minnesota Medicaid nightmare, all right, what's going on in California using taxpayer money to house, feed, clothe, and, basically allow illegal people in this country to live. A lot of them, certainly criminals, not all of them, of course. I mean, I think that's overplayed a little bit maybe on the right, but to whatever extent, I mean, the left's kind of lost their mind. When you talk about it, you're using taxpayer money to do all these things. Now you have Somalians, fleecing the taxpayers of Minnesota for hundreds of millions, if not over $1 billion. And some people are saying it's as high as $8 billion. I mean, that doesn't stand. Okay, they've been exposed. This is being called out. All right, tax dollars are being stolen. They're being spent recklessly and irresponsibly, as Doge proved. It's being, subject to fraud. It's under the influence of people that are lying to us all the time, becoming more and more of a welfare state. We could talk about the number of people on food stamps and how it's increased over the last 15 years, and all these stats are kind of mind-bending. All right, let alone the biggest beneficiaries of all this reckless spending are employees of the public, all right? And it's the biggest nut that the government has is paying their own employees, which is part of the Doge thing, which was right on. This is even worse in Canada, and I give a heads up to my buddy Grant Longhurst, who works with Michael Campbell, and they do, it used to be CKNW, now it's Money Talks. In that podcast, Grant pointed out some of the stats in Canada, which maybe look at the stats in the U.S. around how much of this spending actually goes to public employee salaries. And how much do they actually make? The percentage of them that make over $100,000 is mind-blowing. So all of this is kind of being exposed for being so polarized, where you now are upside down and you have this representation with no taxation. So an illegal citizen is just as represented. They can vote, they get health care, they get free everything without taxation. So we're completely upside down, and that's the best way to look at it. We abdicated from England, okay? We seceded and created the United States because we're being taxed with no representation. In this case, now it's upside down. It's completely flipped because now it's no representation. Representation with no taxation. Now, why is it working? Why is this working? Why are so many people voting for Mandami, for AOC, for Newsom, for Waltz? I mean, who the heck would vote for that guy? I mean, that's mind-blowing to me, but that's just my personal, view of it. But, what is, you kind of say, why isn't it working? And to me, it's like a question that a lot of me and people that I know kind of ask ourselves. What is wrong with these people that go out and deface a Charlie Kirk memorial? Why do you feel the need to do that, acting out like that? Number one, it's being disassociated from the planet electronically. We talked about that, 7.83 hertz, the vibration of the human body, versus what used to be the vibration of the crust of the planet was always the same. Now it's 8.29 hertz and, it spikes higher. And, of course, you're out of touch. But the other part of this gets back to the bigger picture polarization of wealth and income. At some point, when you have a phrase, the 1%ers, okay, there you go. That means the 99% are hurting. So, of course, they're going to rise up and vote in someone that's going to tell them what they want to hear, whether it's true or not. All right? So there's a really interesting book that was published recently. I'm not sure when it was written because it was published post-death by an author that didn't want to publish it because it's so controversial. But it's really interesting because one of the questions is like, what's wrong with these people? And it's like, well, frankly, there's nothing wrong with these people. Right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with these people. They're pissed off. And it's like they've been kind of, they feel like they don't have an upward ladder, that there's not a glass ceiling, that there's a cement ceiling that's at a level that's below their head. So they have to duck constantly just to survive. All right? I like that. That's pretty good. Just coming up with that. That's a good one. So the bottom line here, though, is this thought process that was posted in Leviathan and Its Enemies by Samuel Francis. I'm going to read part of this talk about this book, okay? All right? This describes the political condition which is known now as anarcho-tyranny, which is kind of anarchy but under tyranny, all right? Anarcho-tyranny describes a political condition. I'm going to read a lot, so I'll try to read slow, but I don't want this podcast to be too long, all right? Political condition in which the state abandons its duty to restrain real threats to public order while smothering the daily lives of law-abiding citizens under layers of surveillance, regulation, and punishment. Remember, this is written a while ago, okay? You could see someone writing this today, and that's how appropriate it is today. So that's what makes it really interesting. All right, now continue. What results is a strange inversion. Violent criminals and rioters walk free while ordinary citizens are fined, censored, or even arrested for words they type into their phone. What should the bedrock of justice, the equal application of law, becomes a weapon of selective enforcement used to intimidate the compliant while ignoring the truly dangerous? That's right on. Continuing. Old forms of authority such as family, church, local enterprise give way to sprawling bureaucracies and corporate behemoths, organizations devoted less to the common good than to efficiency, control, and the management of populations. These entities are largely insulated from accountability, and they exist first and foremost to perpetuate themselves. Boom, bam, mic drop, holy mackerel. But there's more. I continue. By allowing chaos to simmer, in parentheses, unpunished crime, lawless streets, constant insecurity. Tell me that's not everywhere now. The regime manufactures this pretext to gain further control. Bam. Further. Meanwhile, the full weight of state authority falls on those who obey the rules precisely because they are easiest to police. It is safer for the state to punish an office worker for an ill-judged social media post than to confront gangs who rule neighborhoods with impunity. It's easier to squeeze citizens who file their taxes than to discipline the oligarch who launders billions of dollars. Disorder distracts, tyranny pacifies. Boom. I mean, that is right on. It really is. And then it goes even further. And I just have to read this. I'm just reading a lot of words, but it's just really so appropriate. Tell me it's not spot on. All right? Now, this is talking about someone that knew the author, knew he had written this book, and when he died, this is the person that published it. Now he's talking about the book. I believe this manuscript grew out of the desire to correct an intellectual deficiency on the right, meaning the right side of the political spectrum, all right, conservatives. I remember discussing with Sam so many times the American right's apparent lack of curiosity about the socio-historical nature of its political circumstances. No one ever seems to explore why the left is ascendant culturally and politically while the right is consigned to a powerless fringe. All right, now, that's not necessarily true right now with Trump in power, but it certainly has been, all right, to whatever degree, even really kind of, dating back to Obama. All right. But this is interesting because I agree with this, and I would put myself on the right. The right lacks the pathology to explain the power of its opponents and shows no interest in finding one. In other words, they're all nuts. All right. They have, we don't understand, what's wrong with these people. That's exactly right. I continue. Thanks partly to Marxism, whose ideological permutations are legion, the left has assembled a vast array of social and economic critiques that are the foundation for its political strategies. That line is exactly spot on true now. Further, and continue, organizations on the left typically focus with missions whose operating strategies are based on critiques of the socio-economic power relationships and the perceived weaknesses or injustices in society. Boom. And they continue. One more. Although it was wildly wrong to think it could fashion a coalition of students and workers, and this goes back to the 60s again with the anti-war movement, and talk about the SDS, which was the Students for a Democratic Society, which was in the 1960s. This guy was a member. So these guys are old, and this guy, died, and then they published a book that he had written a long time ago, not even determined when he wrote that. But I continue. The SDS determined that the university is a potential base and agency and movement of social change, and it has launched campaigns that did, in fact, help turn the American universities into an extremely effective apparatus working for the left's agenda. Bam, mic drop, wow, that's good stuff. But it gets back to the polarization of wealth. That's why this is happening. That's why this is happening. And this is why I said it would happen in the 1980s. Because you can't have 1% with everything and expect that the 99% are going to sit there and take it forever, especially when the situation gets worse and worse and worse for the lower. And that's what's happened over the last 5 years. Since the pandemic, because of inflation, it has put pressure on the lower half of the income scale to a degree that's about to explode into outright rebellion. Seriously. I mean, we have multiple tipping points that we're going to talk about today, and then we have a huge one right at the end.